Hi, everyone. May I request if you can please settle down and we'll start this session. So, welcome and thank you for being here. Devina,
Yes.
over to you.
So, good afternoon, everyone. I hope you had a nice and satisfying meal because we are in for some really interactive and interesting sessions. So, we need you all refueled and recharged. On that note, I welcome you all to the KPMG Leaders 2050 program. What we have here is more than just another event. It's the first ever global gathering for Leaders 2050, and we are bringing together young leaders from over 10 countries. To our international guests, a warm and hearty welcome. Your presence enriches our discussions. And to our clients, thank you for taking out time and joining us for this session. A brief background, Leaders 2050 is a professional network that brings together future leaders who are passionate about driving positive change. Our mission is to equip the next generation with the knowledge, networks, and direction they need to champion a sustainable world, all while emphasizing diversity and inclusion. To give you a quick recap, we initiated this journey as part of the launch of KPMG's flagship annual conclave ENRich on September 12th. The theme for the session was Upskilling the Youth in ESG, and we witnessed some truly engaging discussions with active participation from across our clientele and young minds. And today's gathering builds upon that momentum. We have assembled here again with the participation of our young leaders from across the globe. And our aim today is to engage in an interactive session centered around the theme that is empowering youth for climate action. This resonates deeply with the urgency of our times. Climate action is not just a buzzword, it's an imperative. And today, we seek to empower the youth, the change makers, and the innovators of the future. Our program today is as smooth as a freshly brewed cup of coffee, starting with a fireside chat featuring some brilliant minds. Then we'll throw the floor open for some discussion where your voices and ideas will take center stage. Once again, to each and every one of you here, thank you for dedicating your time and energy to this important cause and joining us today. So let us embark on this exciting journey together and begin with today's session. With that note, I would like to call upon Avery Johnstone, Global Coordinator Leaders 2050, KPMG UK, and Mike Hayes, Climate Change and Decarbonization Leader, Global Head of Renewable Energy, KPMG International. We'll now be beginning with our fireside chat. Over to you.
Thank you, Devina. I didn't hear her describe me as a young leader.
Didn't hear her describe you as a young leader.
Correct.
Yeah, it's weird that she didn't do that. We're so far away from each other. Hi, everyone. As Devina mentioned, my name's Avery Johnstone. I am an associate in our global decarbonization practice with Mike, and really delighted to be here today as the global coordinator of Leaders 2050. I'm joined by Mike Hayes, who I'll let you introduce yourself because I probably won't do it justice.
Thank you very much. First thing I should say is that if I drop off during this session, it's not because I find Avery boring. She's far from that. I've just come off a plane a couple of hours ago. I head up an internal function called the Global Decarbonization Hub, which is really a bringing together of brilliant KPMG experts from all over the world covering different aspects of the climate and decarbonization agenda. I lead KPMG externally on everything to do with climate decarbonization, and with some hesitancy, I say nature, because we're taking nature on board, but please don't ask me too many nature questions. If I'm being absolutely honest, my real passion in life is renewable energy. I've been involved in the renewable energy sector for about 25 years. I came across it in 1999. It changed my career, my life, and I think that sector has made an incredible contribution to the climate change agenda. And anything I can do, and Avery and the team to support, the broad climate agenda. We're going to talk today, I think, a bit about the contribution of the next generation, even though I still count myself in there. But I'm just sharing with you, I've a long-standing passion for renewable energy.
And Mike, you've missed one critical piece of your introduction. You are also leading KPMG's engagement at COP and have been for several years. And so the conversation we're going to have a little bit today as we kick off this discussion and much wider kind of open discussion when we open up the floor for questions is really focused on the engagement of young people, and particularly young professionals in international climate spaces like COP. And so we've done that now last year for the first time, engaging a young person, which happened to be me. And I find myself on this stage to kind of share that story, but also looking towards the future and the plans that we have coming up in Dubai.
Yeah, well, maybe we just start off on bringing young people to COP. The thing I was most proud of last year, Avery, was we brought about 34 people to COP, which was an incredibly diverse group, and it wasn't that we decided to tick boxes to make sure we hit everything. We brought people that I felt had a real contribution to make. And I've been going to KPMG conferences for many years, to Davos, to various energy conferences, and always it's the same sort of, how shall I describe them, as the older, grey-haired.
Sometimes we call them male, pale, and stale, if we're being really bold.
Those are Avery's words, not mine. It was such a joy last year at COP to bring a real cross-selection of people from different geographies, different backgrounds. And for me, the core point about COP, and anybody who's been to COP will know, it's an incredible circus. When you come in and you look at it, you say, why would anybody want to go there? One of the most important things for me, Avery, is to find out what's going on, to get perspective, but actually having people in your own team representing different parts of the agenda, real diversity, that contributed so much to what I and KPMG as an organization took away from COP last year. And I know we're represented by a number of client organizations in the audience today. I know our clients equally value the ability to interact not just with senior leaders, but all levels of KPMG. And increasingly, I think you'll find that is a model that we'll be adopting on a much more widespread basis in KPMG.
Well, it was such a wide variety of subject matter areas. I think there was often times where we would not see each other, actually, for days, because we were engaged in different client conversations, different pavilions, different topics, different alliances that we have. And then we'd all come together and share so much knowledge because it was across nature, climate, decarbonization, a massive geographic spread. But last year was the first time that KPMG, brought a young person to COP. I had the privilege of attending and had been to COP previously in my former life before I joined KPMG. I led a youth program for the New York Times at COP26 in Glasgow. And so when Mike had asked me to participate in COP last year with KPMG, it was quite a natural engagement to be able to communicate and storytell some of the outcomes of COP, which tend to be quite high level, very confusing. If you don't know the kind of negotiation process, I think it can be quite almost disengaging, right? That you hear these things in the media, you see the outcomes, you see the headlines, but you don't know what it means to your clients, you don't know what it means to your community, you don't know what it means to your country, and it all sounds really scary, actually, a lot of the time. So we kind of had a task internally of how do we communicate that with our internal audiences, how do we tell this story, and how do we make sure that the next generation of voices and young leaders is involved in that?
And I want to make a point that I think is really important, Avery, that I certainly saw it last year, and it's coming through already this year. And I'm sure I speak not just for KPMG here, but I speak for some of the other client organizations represented. The passion and interest of our younger generations in what happens at COP, number one, but number two, the role that KPMG is playing at COP. We cannot come to COP and be a passive bystander. I can't stand in front of our people and say, we turned up, we met a few people, we ate out a couple of nights and we went home. That is not good enough. We, as a major global organization, need to contribute to this agenda, and most of the things we're doing at COP, I certainly feel in some way, and a lot of you are aware, we're doing a big project on looking at the barriers to scaling renewable energy. I want to come away from COP this year, Avery, and say KPMG, but all levels of people who participated at COP, plus all the people across our global organization, that they feel part of this big initiative. Because one thing is very clear, our people care about this.
Very deeply. And
if I may give a bit of the origin story, Leaders 2050 was created alongside COP26 in the UK. It was created by Georgina Jarvis, who's in this room somewhere, and a colleague of ours called Max Forshaw. And one was a manager in our energy practice, one is in climate risk and strategy. And they created it alongside a committee of really, really passionate young people to create a space for young leaders to engage, to critique, to challenge, and to learn about the COP process in a way that's applicable to our business and our clients. And so since then, it's snowballed. We've done an amazing globalization program this year where we've got 16 different countries and regions now involved in Leaders 2050, and actually 22 of those co-chairs here with us in India. And I think to your point, Mike, about, our business and the private sector, there's an expectation to show up in a way that's not just entertaining clients or just standing around in front of the COP sign and with a thumbs up for LinkedIn. We've done a survey with Leaders 2050 to inform a COP briefing document that we're currently putting together, which is a briefing to senior leaders from young professionals in the private sector on our top priorities for the upcoming COP negotiations and what senior leaders need to be prioritizing. And one of the questions that we asked in this survey was, what is your perception of the private sector engagement in spaces like COP? And actually 90% of the respondents to that survey said the private sector either has an important role to play or needs to play a bigger role in the COP negotiations in actually allocating the capital that we need to achieve some of our net zero goals.
So I'm going to pick up on a couple of those points, Avery. I am deeply passionate about two parts of the climate agenda. The innovation agenda, which is going to feature prominently later on today. The other part is mobilizing capital for emerging markets. And for far too long, that has been a public sector multilateral bank discussion. The big focus of KPMG going into COP is how do we bring the private sector into the world of climate finance and supporting particularly energy projects in emerging markets. It's such an important topic. We're hosting a joint dinner with UNDP so that we can hear both the public sector perspective and the private sector perspective, because it's not one or the other. This is about collaboration and partnership, and it's really, really critical. And I've been in those discussions far too often, Avery, where we talk past each other, we use a different language, and I'm hoping that this year, not just KPMG and many other organizations feel the same, we can do something different on that one point alone.
And I think that language piece is so important, Mike, both across public sector and private sector, but we even see it across kind of the young professionals and some of our more seasoned colleagues in senior leadership. What makes youth engagement to you good? Like what is meaningful youth engagement to you? How can young people be communicating effectively with senior leaders, and vice versa, actually? What does that look like to you? Well,
absolutely vice versa. I'm actually starting, I didn't think a lot about this session, Avery, in advance, as would be obvious, because I was trying to get a couple of hours sleep. But the one thing I did say to myself, having young leaders say they want a voice is no longer good enough for me. That's not what it's about. This is an agenda for everybody. And all of us were not doing this type of work 5-6 years ago. We were doing renewable energy work, energy transition work, but the deep work around decarbonisation, figuring out what offsetting is, insetting, circular economy, scope 1, 2 and 3, that wasn't part of our routine. So we're all new to this. And what I value most is getting not just the perspective, but the input, the knowledge and the expertise of younger generations, because they are as equally qualified. I may be in a more senior position at one level in an organization. I am not going to be successful, nor will any of our senior leaders, unless we fully, and I mean fully involve, not just ad hoc listening to voices. They need to be fully involved. This is their agenda as much as mine. And also, Avery, if I can say this, I learn from the next generation. I'm going to give you one very simple example. I think we're all starting to think about what this climate agenda means for our lives personally. And some of us, and I'm looking at myself, make very, very poor efforts at trying to change things. I have two members, and as do you, two colleagues in our global team. They're both French, as it happens. Neither have traveled on a plane for about 3 years. And, when I heard that, I said, what I'm doing is not good enough. And that's what I mean, you know, it's a learning, it's not just a listening experience, Avery, it's a learning experience, and it's changing the way we work with clients, but it's also changing the way we conduct ourselves in our own lives.
And so bringing that back to the COP space then, obviously we're flying to Dubai. What we've seen, and kind of the thesis behind us putting together this COP briefing document with Leaders 2050 was that young people are fundamentally underrepresented in spaces like COP. But where they are represented is in the civil society and NGO spaces. We see a lot of young people mobilizing, protesting, out on the streets, doing this kind of work day in and day out. But that comes with a lot of privilege. Not all of us can, not work. Well, we can't be full-time activists. Not all countries have the privilege of protest. Not all countries have the freedom of speech. And so how do we enable young people in the private sector who stand to inherit a lot of the capital allocation power that's needed to reach some of these goals to adequately engage with senior leaders? And so looking forward to COP28 then, Mike, what are your kind of ambitions for the engagement of young people, and what's your ask to the private sector before Dubai?
That's probably the hardest question you've asked me.
Sorry.
So I have, as you can imagine, Avery, I have lots of ambitions for COP28. I'm probably at a stage where I'm getting to the end of my career, and legacy is probably the most important point for me as a human being. And I come across this all the time. Other people feel exactly the same. They want to do something that's going to make a difference. And we want to say it to our own kids and our own grandchildren in due course. But this is why the engagement with the next generation is so important. These are the people who are going to carry the initial ideas that we have today forward into generations. And what COP is most of all, it's not actually about the negotiations. So much progress will be made on things like Article 6 and various other things. The real benefit is it helps to inform the agenda going forward. And the only way you're going to do that successfully is by engaging with the NGOs. So I'm not even making this a sort of a younger versus an older point for a second. We need to be much broader as a commercial organization about who we talk to. And there's some incredible people you meet working with these NGOs. I mean, you're very close to some of them. And we as a private sector organization with a commercial objective in life, we could do a much, much better job about understanding the other side of the divide. We can advise our clients better. So I'm hoping really, Avery, that the combination of an open mind, in a willingness to involve the next generation, and we will come away from COP with better perspectives to inform our own lives, but also to inform the work we do with clients.
And so it's almost about being a part of setting the agenda rather than reacting to the agenda, both so we can do better by our clients, but also so we can do the right thing moving forward, because we've got a pretty critical tipping point, or several tipping points, as the IPCC report would say, that we're at right now for that engagement.
Yeah, just since you mentioned the IPCC report, here's a reality, Avery. The scientific warnings are getting worse. They're getting worse all the time. The reality, and we saw it this summer in Hawaii, in Canada, in many different places, is becoming much more stark. What's going to happen is very clear to me. At the moment, a lot of talk about energy transition and net zero. I can tell you, governments around the world are working hard to figure out new ways to drive this agenda. Policy and regulation already plays a really important role today. It's actually going to play an increasingly important role. And what that means is that no organization can afford to avoid this agenda going forward, because what policymakers are trying to do is that if you think you can do nothing, that will hurt you financially. If I was to cut across all of the SFDR, EU taxonomy measures, CBAM, EUDR, they want you to, if you're going to continue operating in a high carbon economic, or with a high carbon economic model, the ultimate aim, I'm going to say this pretty bluntly, the ultimate aim over time is to put you out of business. And I'm not mincing my words there, but we're past the time when we should mince our words. We really have to, if we're going to help our clients, Avery, if we're going to help the next generation, we have to be very straight about the reality. And it's that type of direct thinking that I really want to embed across the KPMG, ESG and climate teams.
And so, Mike, I think we're coming to the end of our time, if I'm not mistaken, before we open up to a bit of an open discussion for this room to contribute. Mike, my last question to you. If you could have kind of one call to action, or I think you might have two when we spoke of two calls to action, to both the folks in this room and senior leaders, but also to the young leaders in this room and externally, not necessarily relative to COP, but maybe relative to climate and the climate energy transition, what is your call to action to kind of deepen that meaningful engagement of young people, and what can both sides of that be doing?
So my personal inbox is flooded every day of the week with client stuff, with rubbish that you get. But I'm very, very clear about one point. Not only do I want to hear from young leaders, I need to hear from young leaders. And it is one of the great privileges and joys of my job, the amount of interaction I get to have with people all over the world, because I just say to them, feel free to reach out to me. And I can think of many examples just in the last couple of weeks. That's not, maybe I'm a nice guy, I don't know. But actually, I value those interactions. So my first call to action is please, please, keep the dialogue open, not just with me, but also with other senior leaders. I don't know whether ENRich is in the room, but James Mackay there is always willing to take a call from anybody and is doing some fantastic work. That's the first part of my call to action, Avery. The second part is just echoing your sentiments is no longer enough. I want the next generation to play a more aggressive, a more enhanced role about being part of this agenda. We can't afford to be without the voice of the next generation. And that's why, in our global ESG program, in our ENR program here at ENRich, this didn't happen 5-10 years ago. We're going big on next generation, and that's why.
Well, this didn't even happen last year. Last year, James Mackay was the youngest person at our global ENR strategy day. Go James. But this year we've got 22 young people. So Mike, I think we'll hold you to that and encourage you to kind of extend the table for us to participate as an amazing senior leader. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you everyone in the audience. And I think I'm handing back to Ankit to continue this discussion as a team and as a group in this room.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Avery. I think your conversation has set the context very well for what is to follow next. And what is going to follow next is that we open up this floor and we hear from the young audience that we have over here. And we have quite an audience. I mean, if I'm not wrong, I think we have representatives from over 10 countries today. So I really look forward to hearing your perspectives and engaging with you all. The theme of our discussion will be broadly two. First of all, you want to understand what are the perspectives of the youth around energy transition, around climate change. Are we doing enough? Are we not doing enough? And the second theme is, how do we integrate these voices, these perspectives, into more tangible actions, right, into climate policies? And the way we're going to run these conversations is that we might be putting some of you on the spot. We might go around the room asking questions. And I won't be doing this alone. I have with me my co-moderator, Delphine. If you can please introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you, Ankit. Hi, everyone. My name is Delphine Chagnon. I'm a senior manager and co-chair to the Leaders 2050 Network in Canada. I'm very looking forward to this discussion.
So, the first question that you want to put out is, what is the biggest concern for the young audience in the room with regards to energy transition and climate change? Dave? So Dave Malia here is our dear friend, and he works at the World Economic Forum and an ex-colleague.
Hi, hello everyone. I think the biggest challenge, if you ask me, I think it's a very piecemeal kind of an approach where we tend to focus on a particular technology, whereas it needs a much holistic view. Giving you an analogy, we have a jigsaw puzzle, right? In that jigsaw puzzle, each of the elements which are separated from each other needs to be connected for the jigsaw to be complete. We cannot say that, hey, this is the most important piece. No, it won't happen. It needs everyone, and everyone plays a very important role. Till we don't do that, this won't be possible. Thanks.
Yeah, so if we turn to a more young voice, Kiva, part of our island firm, do you have anything to respond to that? Do you agree with that statement? And what do you think are the greatest risks right now in energy transition?
Thanks, Delphine. My name is Kiva. As Delphine said, I'm from KPMG Ireland. Yeah, definitely agree with what you had to say there about bringing, or everyone being involved. I think one of the greatest risks is, I suppose, just to make sure that we do transition in a just way and bring everyone along with us. And I suppose to echo, rather than repeat something that Colin O'Neill said yesterday, but to make sure that we're having those harsh, tough conversations now and looking at the commitments that we've made at this point, and having a think about where we are with them and do we need to rethink them or see how realistic they are at this point.
Talking about the just transition, Avery, we just did a survey to young leaders within KPMG and outside our network. Do you have anything to add in that respect?
I can, and I'm very sorry that you guys have to hear from me again so early in this discussion. Thank you, Delphine. In the survey that we did that I mentioned when Mike and I were chatting about our COP briefing document, we asked young leaders, both internally and externally to KPMG, what their top priorities were relative to the COP agenda. So all of the COP core kind of presidential themes, which include finance, energy, nature, gender equality, and the others. And we had a great survey respondents from all over the world and kind of almost all regions or kind of continents represented, not quite all countries, unfortunately. But the top theme that came out, sorry, I think I'm standing right in front of the, let me try and move over here and see if it will be happier with me away from the speaker. The top theme that came out as, by far actually was just transition. And so it's really, really deeply embedded, I think, in the perspectives of young people, how important a just transition is, and also in many ways, how all of the other themes fall into that, right? If we're financing a transition and it's not just, what's the finance for? If we're gender equality falls into the definition of just transition. Energy must fall into the definition of just transition from an affordability and availability perspective. So almost, is that our guiding light? Is that our North Star? I guess would be a question I'd pose to this group. Thanks.
Thanks, Avery. I just want to make one thing clear, that while we are directing these questions to specific individuals, everyone is open to kind of just raise your hands and we'll get the mic to you. Let's hear some industry perspective on the same question. And I would like to direct this to Neha. You work at BP. What is the biggest concern for you? And you can speak from your own personal opinion or from an oil and gas perspective.
Hi, everybody. This is Neha Jain from BP. What I feel is that energy transition and this transition is going to be one of the toughest one for the world. Because globally, every nation, every community is in a different place. And this transition is not going to happen if we don't go together as a group, moving in the right direction. Whether it's affordability, whether it's energy security, whether it's climate, all need to go hand in hand. The priorities at various times for various nations will change, but they have to go hand in hand. Energy transition is a journey, which means that we have to test all the new technologies. We don't know which is going to be the winner, but we have to keep the faith. And at the same time, make sure that the livelihoods of the world and the citizens is improving, and which means that for a while, the traditional sources of energy will also have a play. So how do we make sure that in that meantime we do responsible traditional energy? I think that is very important because you cannot switch overnight. So doing that in a manner where we are reducing the emissions to the extent, can we carbon capture? Can we clean our traditional energy sources to the extent possible? Can we look at energy efficiencies? That's the lowest hanging fruit. Do we really need the energy that we are used to? Asking those basic questions, the first, going back to the first principles, that is what I believe personally. Make it simple for yourself and the world.
Thank you, Neha. Let's do a quick show of hands. Are we doing enough to address the concerns that we have just heard? Those who say yes can raise your hands now. All right, so it seems we're not doing enough. And if I change the question to, let's say, what is that one thing that we need to focus on to accelerate the energy transition? What area would you like the action to happen, right? We heard challenges like just transition. All right, Mike has raised his hand.
I just wanted to get in ahead of James Mackay. The one topic that I have focused on for the past 6 years has been innovation. And it is a commonly accepted wisdom, but not by everybody, that we do not have the technologies today to get to net zero at a corporate level, never mind at a national level. And one of the really fantastic things that's happening is the degree of sustainable energy and wider climate solution innovation that's happening. And I'm seeing some absolutely phenomenal things. I came across a really interesting green steel solution, and not just the renewables for green steel, a couple of days ago through a colleague of mine. But the reality is that we are not supporting the innovation agenda. You talk to all of these independent innovators, they will tell you they don't know where to go for capital, they don't know where to find the partners to help them to scale their innovations, and they don't know how to get to market. And it is an ambition of mine in KPMG that we actually use our convening global power to actually bring together the different actors on the innovation agenda. If we don't tackle innovation, we're going nowhere with this agenda, in my opinion.
Yeah. And thank you so much for bringing that up, because today is day one of ENRich, and the theme for day one is innovation. We have an innovation summit in the evening, and we have a startup awards following that. So thank you so much, Mike, that you mentioned this point. Yeah.
Thank you. And just to link the 2 points in terms of what's worrying and what to do. On the first point around what my biggest worries are, and to Mike's point about this becoming a policy and regulatory issue, I think one of my biggest concerns is that it potentially becomes a wedge issue in politics, particularly in this increasingly populist world that we seem to live in. So that's one thing that typically worries me. And the other thing is the seemingly lack of a link between climate disaster that we almost see on a daily basis on the TV and our day-to-day lives. And you touched upon it a bit, Mike, in terms of flights and stuff like that, but there doesn't seem to be that tangible link between the two. And I think to the point around one of the solutions is it's key that education is incredibly important, because until people understand the ends justify the means, you'll never see the sort of action we need to take to have the sort of impact we need to take. And if you take something like the war in Ukraine, and you see what a call to arms did for the gas demand in Europe, for example, in one winter, in terms of the ability to wean ourselves off Russian gas that one winter, because we could see the tangible impact that would have on something like a war in Ukraine. The education side of that, being able to link our day-to-day lives, our flights, what we eat, how we heat our homes and everything else to what we see around the floods and fire risks and everything else on TV, I think education sits at the heart of that. But I would say that because everyone in my family is a teacher, so I've been bred into me since a small child that education is the answer.
We're just going to have a two-way debate here. So I fundamentally and absolutely agree with you, James. I actually want to go back to your earlier point about the link between climate disasters and the sheer scale of inaction that we're seeing. And I always draw the comparison to COVID. When we, in the early months of COVID, saw those dramatic scenes, not in China or somewhere else, we saw it in our own back door, in the UK, in France, Italy and Spain in particular, I said, my God, like what is this? Why are we not getting the same reaction? Like, how many floods, heat waves, droughts in emerging markets need to happen for those of us in the West to stand up and say, enough is enough? And it is not happening, and it is one of my single greatest frustrations. But that's, James, why I think we're past the point of allowing voluntary action. If the private sector doesn't step up and really move on this, governments are not going to stand by much longer. We are seeing some really dramatic things out of the European Union. This, for example, this new deforestation directive. From next year onwards, you try importing chocolate, leather, other goods into the European Union, and it's linked to deforestation. You can't do that. We're only at the start of a big, big public sector reaction to this.
I was just to come back on the politics side, it's really interesting because the politics is only as powerful as the electorate allows them to be, right? And it goes back to this point about it being a wedge issue. I don't know if you look in the UK, the ability for something like Brexit became such a wedge issue in our society, and you're seeing it with the Conservative and Labour Party conferences last week and this week. It's becoming a wedge issue again, and that terrifies me because they're only going to have the authority that's given to them by the general public. And we've been quite blessed in the UK since 2008 when we had the Climate Change Act, which had that cross-party consensus, and we're starting to see that being challenged a little bit now with the rolling back on that commitment to some of those climate objectives. And that's to appease a certain part of society who are struggling as well. So this is where the just side comes back into it, and how you put these costs on the people who are best positioned to wear them, essentially, as well. But I don't disagree. I just think that political risk is incredibly important as we start telling people how to heat their homes, what food to eat, how to fly, because net zero has been relatively undisruptive to this point. We've basically swapped dirty electrons for clean electrons, and we've made some really good progress with that, but we haven't had to fundamentally change human behavior. So people always say you can't change physics. I agree, but I also think it's really difficult to kind of change human nature and human behavior as well, which is essentially what we're going to have to do. I'll shut up now.
No, that's actually great. That's actually great. And let's hear from more people, right? What are the climate actions? Yeah, Asta, you want to have a go? So we have Asta, who works at the International Energy Association.
Thank you. I work with International Energy Agency, IEA, Asta. Just one thing that I wanted to add when Mike and James were talking. I think what we are missing is focusing on the demand side, because the more and more you start. So I work in the renewables and power sector. That's my focus with the IEA, and I work with the Indian government very closely. So what we are missing here is we have policies and regulations in place on the supply side, but on the demand side, we are missing big time, because the more and more technologies become decentralized, distributed. You talk about electric vehicles, you talk about rooftop solar. The consumer becomes more centric to this transition. So if our policies and regulations are not catered to, make them aware of, what this transition would be like, that is where we will not move together like what we are trying to do. So we have big grids, we have big plants, but I think we will start moving more decentralized and distributed. So if we can think from that perspective, if the consumer is at the center of energy transition, how we can bring the people together. I think we've talked about just transitions, a lot of people have already said that. So I think, and just on the young professionals, I would like to say that energy transitions has also started becoming more multidisciplinary, and it just is not a mechanical engineer coming here and, just doing the work. So it's finance, it's engineering, it's a mix of, it's innovation, it's R&D. So I think if we recognize that, having people who are from multidisciplinary environment and, bring them on board on recruitment while we're recruiting for people, I think that will also add on to the whole debate on on energy transitions. That's all I wanted to say.
Talking about cross-sector collaboration, I'm going to let our young people say their view on that. Adam, could you tell us what you think the role of cross-sectoral collaboration will help include young people in the energy transition?
Sure, thanks, Delphine. So I think the challenge of fostering youth-led climate initiatives where young voices are truly shaping the agenda, so aren't just being heard, but are truly having an impact, is kind of one of those really significant challenges to achieving the targets that we're all aware of. And I think that we've seen through Leaders 2050 that cross-sector collaboration is absolutely key. So we're working with the private sector, we're working with the governments, we're working with young leaders from academia to bring this really cross-sector collaborative approach, and we're really seeing lots of fantastic benefits from that for the young leaders that we're engaging with. So we're seeing knowledge transfer, the sharing of insights, the sharing of expertise. We're seeing the building of relationships that young leaders will be able to carry with them throughout their careers as we look ahead to the next 20, 30 years, where we're hopefully going to be the change makers that make this happen. And we're also seeing the development of skills and upskilling, which is absolutely key through these kind of cross-sector collaborations that we're doing through Leaders 2050. So I think all in all, there's a huge role for cross-sector collaboration to play. And it's absolutely key to making sure that young leaders have the skills, the knowledge, and the relationships that they need to make these kind of initiatives happen in practice.
Thanks, Adam. I think I'll move over to this side because we have some people over here, and we need to hear more from them, like what are the areas that they want to see action going on, right? And Wade, I'm sure you have something in your mind.
Sure, thanks. So I've only just started working, been about 2 years now, and at KPMG, working with clients, there's a debate that I've come across quite often, which is carrot versus stick. I feel like going forward, that discussion needs to change and those need to come together. So from my perspective, though, the best way to bring those two together is through robust carbon markets. I mean, even if you just look at the CBAM news coming out, it sent shockwaves throughout every exporting country in the world. And that's just a little bit of a tidbit of what carbon markets could be. I mean, you need to be able to promote clean companies at the same time punish the polluting ones. So I think carbon markets need to be greatly, encouraged and pushed forward.
All right. I think we have heard just transition, we have heard innovation, we have heard carbon markets. What else? What are the other areas that we really need to focus on? Okay, Deb, and then we'll go to Tariq.
Thank you. We heard about carbon markets, and we also heard about demand-side management to actually pick up. Over the last 2-3 years, a lot has happened in the world, okay? And the focus on typical technologies has also changed. If I tell you, over the last 5 years, nuclear, investments in advanced nuclear has almost tripled. And the most astonishing part here is 90% of these investments are coming from private sectors. Okay, that's one. And if you go by various reports, they say that if nuclear is not coming up in a big way, net zero will never happen for the world. As simple as that. Second, something more which also comes up is sustainable aviation fuels. They say by 2030, 10 to 18% of jet fuels has to be addressed by sustainable aviation fuels. If I give you the number today, you will be astonished. It's 0.06%. So the transition is huge here. So that's what I was telling, that there are various actors here. Apart from the actors that there is focus on, green hydrogen, storage, we are doing a little, but I think a lot more has to come up from these areas.
Yeah, hi, I am Mohammad Tariq from Climate Policy Initiative. So I think one thing that we are missing here is the money part. So for happening anything, or we have to achieve the net zero goal, the financing is the most important part here. And if you look at various reports, it is well documented that the climate change adaptation and mitigation, the cost of that financing is quite lower in the global south while it is happening in global north. Reason being that the political risk and other risks are very low and the premium is very low there. And so the money that which should be flowing from global north to south is not happening. You could have mitigated that 1 ton of carbon dioxide at a fraction of cost in the global south. So what I am talking about right now is that the financing should be the core of accelerating this energy transition. And the money that is lying in the global north, it should flow to the global south so that it could be put at a meaningful use. And apart from this, the one thing that I would also talk about is the transition finance. Once you are talking about financing, we always go through this financing of green financing or sustainable financing, but overnight changes can't happen. You cannot go from the conventional sources of energy to the renewable energy of sources in one night. You need to have a transitionary phase. There is a big just transition focus on the energy transition. Like you have people directly employed in these conventional sources, directly, indirectly, and then there are associated livelihood that is being impacted if you are moving out from that conventional sources. So if you have to move in a just manner, you need to have some kind of a just transition finance and energy transition finance. So these two things should be kept in mind when we talk about net zero.
It's interesting that we talk about finance because one of our questions in our survey was how to finance green energy. And one of the answers that we got from young professionals was that they would be in favor of using fuel and gas profits to finance green energy. Does anyone have any opinion on that subject?
Thank you very much, Matt Kuchera from KPMG UK. I really like the last two opinions because I felt that maybe you broke a little bit this line, this defeatist line, that everything is going wrong, and really highlighted things that we can do well and that we are doing well. So, you know, I'm a great believer in nuclear energy. I'm KPMG Global Nuclear Energy Lead. So I think your point about the role nuclear energy can play is a very important one. But I just want to say that we need to be very focused on actual solutions, right? Bashing and rhetoric is not going to get us very far. We need arguments, and I think the great thing about young people and the power of young people is that you have the analytical toolkit, the knowledge and the information, which goes, and scientific facts that far, you know, outstrip the kind of the old ways we are used to. And I think the power of that knowledge, analysis, can really make a difference. But we have to turn this into models that can actually work. So we need to build frameworks and models which allow us to finance the transition over a very long period of time. Because this is the only way we can convince people to embrace it and for people to be actually able to afford it. Right? Second, we have to your point, we have to create financial mechanisms that actually work. Because if we don't rely on proper financial incentives, we have no hope of genuine private sector participation on a large scale, which is absolutely critical, right? So we have to replace just hard policies with clever mechanisms that bring in large-scale financing. And I just want to say one last thing, that, you know, the challenge is multidimensional, right? So we have to work on every single aspect of it together. And I think only if we create mechanisms, whether it is nuclear or new source of wind, or indeed new technologies, as Mike was highlighting, we can actually successfully transition. There is no one single solution. And I think the fact that we have so many great new leaders who can bring in new solutions gives me hope that we can do it. Thank you.
This one? All right. Yeah, so just staying on the same point of solutions, right? If anyone in the room had to bet on one solution or one innovation, what would that be? I know, I mean, it's a difficult question, but just, you can take a first shot, and anyone in the room, especially the young generation, where do you want to put your money on?
Young by no means, but I would bet on the human mind.
That's a nice answer.
John, you're from Japan. Do you have any technology or innovation that comes to mind regarding the transition?
Yeah, thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is John, and I'm from KPMG Japan. So I think one of the next innovative big thing in Japan is digital platform related to climate change. Because, you know, Japan is one of the most aging country in the world. So I think we need more advanced technology like digital twin, the AI, the blockchain to solve the problem of lacking resources to respond to climate change. Yeah, thank you.
And Margarita, you're in Canada. Do you see the same type of technology? Is there something different in Canada than in Japan?
Hi, everyone. My name is Margarita. I'm from Canada, as Delphine just mentioned. I think on the road to, you know, the energy transition, we can't forget the rate of digital disruption that we're having, you know, in our time. And just from the perspective of a young professional with less than 5 years of experience, you know, we're seeing digitalization and, you know, as Joan just mentioned, centralized platforms, automation, blockchain technologies, geospatial data, and essentially using the power of those digital solutions to find solutions around climate change and to better measure and drive actionable insights from those digital platforms. So that's, you know, for example, you know, my brother right now, he's 12 years old and he's learning how to code Python. How are we going to upskill, you know, the new generation to come in to actually build solutions that can help this challenge around the energy transition? So that's a little perspective I have.
I think we'll stay around this topic for a little bit more time, and then we'll move on to the next theme. What I'll suggest is we'll just open up for okay, we have one more response from Mike.
So I'm slightly surprised nobody mentioned the usual answer to this question, which is direct air capture as the magical solution. But however, it's not the answer I want to give. I really like what Anvesha has said about the human mind, and it kind of links into the point I really want to make, in that in this part of the discussion, we've kept talking about technologies that we're aware of today. There's actually work being done on new technologies, and I'll give you one example. I'm working on the project, new technologies that can completely transform the energy transition. We just haven't heard of them yet. So, and I'm sure Matt could talk about nuclear fusion. I won't go in that particular space. I'm working in my own home country in Ireland with a bunch of innovators who figured out how to take ambient air and produce renewable energy and clean water from ambient air. Whether that ambient air is in cold climates, like where I come from, or actually in Gulf climates. And it's a classic innovation story. They've developed a turbine that successfully does this. The only problem is it sits on this table. To actually really scale that, they need massive finance and massive sort of industrial scale piloting up. But the point I'm making is whether it's that technology or something else, there are people today working on new things that are going to solve, or what I personally believe, I'm glad Matt made the point about we have to be optimistic. Like if we're leaving a session like this being pessimistic, we're all in trouble. But that's why I am such an advocate of the innovation agenda. It is truly inspiring, and we didn't connect it to the next gen, but next gen are the innovators. It's not people like me to the most extent. So that's why I would continue this discussion all day long, and I know it leads into the wider discussion later.
And interestingly, we have a solution upstairs that we are showcasing that's on carbon capture, if I'm not wrong. So we did a startup award like last year, and one of the startups, they have a solution on carbon capture. So I suggest you go upstairs and check out the showcases that we have over there. So very quickly, we'll open this question up for everyone. You don't have to give a descriptive answer, but you can just raise your hand and just talk about the solution, just name the solution, name the area where you want to see the action happen.
Hi, I'm Devrat from NTPC. I'd like to draw the attention of everyone. Everyone has been talking of what is the technology and what is the things that is going to happen in the future, and that is where the growth and where the buck lies. But no one is talking of the reparation of what we have already done. It's just that we can impede the rate of, destruction that we are going to face in the future. But we are not talking of the carbon sinks, neither of the carbon sequestration, neither are we incentivizing that sector, or we are even having a talk on that. Because until and unless you do not create a carbon sink, I do not know to what extent mankind can actually control this. So that is a particular field that I would like everyone to address upon.
That's very relevant. Marlon?
Hello everyone, my name is Marlon from KPMG Brazil. So talking about new technologies, I think I could add something related to the green mining in Brazil that are developing some new methods for extraction and also implementing some new technologies in mining production in order to reduce emissions and somehow created some new sort of value in the mining prices, and I already see some of my clients that are being funded by some financial institutions just because of the new technologies that they are implementing right now. So I should consider I step back in the basis economic, like we have some sort of other commodities in Brazil that are really need this type of improvement, and I can see this type of new technology implementation in mining, and it's a kind of new technology that I think it's working quite good in Brazil.
Thank you, Marlon. Paritosh, you have something in your mind?
So I don't have a particular solution in mind per se, but I think as a young professional, I think two challenges that I see. One is that still the fight against climate change is not very people engaging, I would say. Like during COP also, we see, thousands of announcements, new alliances, new commitments. Then another COP happens just after 1 year and we forget about what we committed 1 year back. And in terms of information also, I think we need to make it a bit simpler. We focus, I think, too much on business models, technologies, but I think there are communities who need to be engaged in this in a very simplistic manner as to what climate change means to them individually. And there is often not much talk on what actions we can take as individuals. This can be day-to-day action of ours, like reducing food wastage, opting to, say, carpooling or using public transport. So I think at individual level, how we should engage people to drive their actions, because I heard that we are talking about demand, how to create demand for these technologies. Right now, there is a premium attached to these kind of technologies, but if the end consumers itself is opting for it, even if it is at a premium or so. I think the demand will get automatically created. I think we have sufficient ecosystem to do R&D on the technologies, but I think rather than making it a lot more complicated, we need to just keep let people drive this agenda and involve more people into the actions or the commitments that we make.
No, I think that's very relevant because youth are considered as climate champions, right? So the first action comes from within. We have to demonstrate in our own actions, our own lifestyle, what we actually want to do for the climate. Okay, we have.
Hi, my name is Himanshu and I'm from Solar Energy Corporation of India. So I'll speak from the renewable energy perspective. So we are working in the execution phase side. So one of the things which I consider as far as energy transition is concerned is to understand the demand. As someone rightly said, that demand side management is very important. Why it helps is since we formulate energy contracts, right? So for that demand, to understand the demand is very important. So if I give you one example, so there is a state in Bihar, in India, Bihar. So they started using smart meters, right? And because of that, they were getting the data, and that company became profitable in last 64 years first time. So that is something that I believe is very important as far as energy transition is concerned, because we need to understand the demand, and for that we need to have conducive energy contracts. So that is very important as far as energy transition is concerned.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Himanshu. So, okay, Harsh has a point, and all right, so let's go over here first.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mariko, and I work for the Climate Group, and I recently worked on the G20 project. So just wanting to respond to a couple of questions to you, because actually recently government of India, focused a lot on lifestyle for environment, and that has been mainstreamed, and a lot of focus was put on life. And so G20 will formulate a lot of policies on that. Also on the demand side, I think, my friend from the IEA spoke on demand side. I work for the Climate Group, so we have something called the RE100, where we we ask corporates to make commitments to achieve net zero. It's not easy to get corporates to make commitments, and for them to match up to their commitments is another conversation altogether. So it's difficult. Also, when we try to get these commitments from the companies, there's a lot of lag on the rules and regulations also. So we are also working very closely with the state government in trying to ensure that open access rules are more clear so that companies can make those targets. So yeah, just on that.
Thank you. Yeah. You can use this one, Harsh, no problem.
So I've been listening to this conversation, and the feeling that I have is when we talk about energy transition, let me just drop transition. Let's just talk about energy. When we talk about energy, we have been using energy on daily basis across different forms. And what we have seen is it's an habit. It's not about awareness. It's more about habit. We have this platform Leaders 2050. There are schools where we have got SDG labs. You have kids, 4 years, 5 years old, learning SDG goals. Can this not be, imbibed across the global education system in some way or the other? And that's one more thing that, I would want senior leaders to actually talk about at COP. Because this is something, anything that we do is a part of our habit. And if the habit itself, or, during your childhood, is imbibed in a manner that, you only see and think about cleaner things or protecting in the environment, I think that would be a breakthrough that we would achieve. And that is a phase of energy transition that we need to, take care of.
Thank you, Harsh. Any further? Okay, Dave Malia.
I will go back to the first question you asked me, and whatever you were telling, that one solution which we say on or which is required. Many studies, what they show is they say that whatever the world requires in terms of technologies to reach net zero is already available. We don't need something else disruptive rather than what we have. One thing which is important here is the second question you asked, collaboration. I think it's all collaborated within all these things. What is green hydrogen without renewables? What is renewables or dispatchable renewables without storage? So all of these are interrelated and they all add up to it. So I think rather than that one solution, if it has to be a one solution, it is collaboration that has to be here. Otherwise it's difficult.
Sure, that's absolutely true. Absolutely true. We have heard a lot of opinions. I've heard words like just transition. I've heard the demand side. I've heard innovation. We have a fair perspective of what the voices in this room are, right? And the young voices, of course. Now, what do we do next? How do we integrate these voices in tangible actions? How do we mainstream these voices in climate policies? And that's what we're going to delve into next. And I believe Delphine has some questions for some of our members over here.
Yeah, so I will start with Georgina, who's a co-chair in the UK committee. I actually started the Leaders 2050 initiative. So Georgina, what's your view on government, and do you think that they should consider mandatory quotas or incentives to make sure that youth are involved in decision-making around the energy transition?
Thanks, Delphine, and hi everyone. I'm Georgina from KPMG UK. So I think touching on Delphine's question on whether governments should make it mandatory is kind of a question I'm not going to answer. The question I'm going to answer is the role businesses can play. Because I don't think business leaders should be waiting for government to tell them to listen to young people's voices. It's about giving them the voices without that. It doesn't need to be mandatory. I think we've heard a lot from our senior leaders on the value of giving them that opportunity. So why do we need to wait for a government to tell you to do it? I think the point here is that business leaders need to find the right forums and the right approaches to enabling that within their organizations. So things we've seen work are things like shadow boards, things like giving people innovative spaces and time to actually think about solutions. And I think to Mike's point earlier, it's not just about hearing young people's voices, it's about actually embedding them and actually hearing solutions and giving them space to give real opinions rather than just space to say something. And so I think it's really about finding the solutions within your organizations that will enable young people's voices to really be heard.
If I take a step back, and just try to understand what are the barriers that is stopping the youth from, being more active and being more engaging in these climate discourses. One of the barriers that we came across in our first event was upskilling. The space and the scale at which energy transition is happening, it requires a drastic skill transformation, right? I'm just curious to understand from the KPMG Leaders 2050 chairs over here. You guys have also done a lot of events. You have interacted with the youth in your own country. So this is not for a specific individual, but whoever is interested to share perspectives on what are the barriers that you have seen in your interactions. We'll be very, very curious to know.
Maya, you're from our US team. Do you have anything to add to that?
Hi, thanks, Delphine. I'm Maya from the US, KPMG. Yeah, and honestly, I think it's all been said here before in thinking about the skills that young people need. In our COP briefing document and survey that we sent out for Leaders 2050, we found that young people see upskilling and the skills gap as one of the biggest risks to the energy transition and just to their needs and their ability to meet climate commitments and to help with this change. And In thinking about the skills that we need, I think, again, it's already been said, everyone's hitting on it. It's one, these technical skills in the energy markets and a true understanding of what the big drivers for the energy transition are. Two, it's creativity and innovation and bringing fresh perspectives, new idea, creativity, a useful perspective, and also working with the emerging technologies that everyone mentioned. And then three, again, this cross-functional collaboration, so working across sectors, across industries, with each other to build something great and to really create that meaningful impact.
Thank you. And aside from skills, Arlen, from the Netherlands, do you have any view on other challenges that are faced by youth while being empowered in the energy transition?
Yes, I think so. What I think is a challenge for the young generation is to see that we're all actually in the same team, but to find the way to communicate that. I think it's been said here in the room many times already, we all have the same goals, but for us to have a space in that room and to be able to communicate what we think about this and to get that engagement as well, that's a challenge for us, but that's also a very nice opportunity and for us to let our voices be heard. And lastly, I think we need to set up the right networks also within our organizations, what you mentioned as well, within our organization, but also cross organizations and with NGOs and governments to be able to communicate those voices.
So we have skills, we have networks, and Paritosh, we were chatting over lunch. I know for a fact that you have an interesting answer to this.
So, So I think what we were discussing over lunch is the fact that right now how we are approaching it is a bit, I would say, reactive process. Like something ought to happen for us to say that, okay, I will increase my commitment to climate change, and it's a bit convenient fight right now. And whenever there is a disruption, be it in supply chain or geopolitics, then the attention towards climate change just reduces substantially. I think when the Russia-Ukraine war was happening, at that point of time, one of the biggest risks that was highlighted was also that whether our commitments toward climate will diverge to something that is more urgent. So I think that kind of mainstreaming also needs to happen, because even if there are geopolitical disruptions, there have been proven evidences that sustainable solutions can help in such dire scenarios as well. And now again we are, right now what news we are reading is again focusing back on what is happening between few countries. Again we are moving back to geopolitics. So climate mainstreaming in the sense of our day-to-day conversations needs to happen.
Okay, Vikas has a point to make.
I think security, I would say, is a very important dimension. When we talk about, say, people, what do they want? Security. So when we look at skilling, employment, and job-linked skilling regimes should come in, employment-backed, purpose-led skilling regimes. Second part of security is nation. They are looking at resource security, or they are looking at maybe energy security. So again, security dimension comes in. For a corporation, it is basically revenue security, growth security, profit security, and so on. So I think that security could be a cross-cutting area that integrates all of this. A quick thought.
Yeah, thank you, Vikas. So I think this adds on to a list of the priorities that we need to focus on. We have one more volunteer over here.
Thanks, Ankit. Hi, everyone. Charlotte Dorrington from KPMG, Denmark. I think one of the key pieces and one of the key barriers is awareness and lack of awareness at senior leadership level and within decision makers around understanding how to create channels so that you can hear voices of marginalized groups or underrepresented groups, such as young people. And I think unless you're aware that these people have opinions, you're not necessarily going to understand to listen to them. And I think the Co-op, which is a supermarket brand in the UK, ran a really interesting piece of research recently. And one of the outcomes of that is 80% of young people feel really strongly about climate change, but they just don't know how to get involved and how to get their voices heard. And I think that's a really interesting piece to take away and for all senior leaders to think about.
Thank you, Charlotte. Marlon?
Just to add something related to what Charlotte just mentioned, I think it's really important that the leadership bring the junior leadership to the process of the decision making, not just because we were the voice, but I think we also can bring a new perspective of new issues that somehow they are not in contact with, and most of the times I think this interaction is somehow the key to reduce this gap between what they think we should do and what we think they should do, and then create something together. I think that's the point.
Skilling, networks, awareness. What are the other barriers that is stopping the youth voice to actually integrate and mainstream in policy making? So Leaders 2050 was conceptualized to basically address some of these barriers, some of these concerns. And I would again go back to my colleague Adam. We were discussing the kind of activities that you guys have done in the UK. Where do you see value for the for the younger generation in platforms like these, and more importantly, how do you think we can make it more tangible and we can enhance the overall experience and meaning of a platform like this?
Thanks. So I think, firstly, there's a real opportunity here for career development through things like this. So there's an opportunity to develop skills, there's an opportunity to build relationships, which will enhance people's own ability to, I guess, shape the agenda. So develop the skills, develop the learnings, develop the relationships, not only within their own organization, but across the sectors as well, and across with client organizations too, to make sure that, I guess, ourselves as a cohort of young leaders are well equipped to address some of the challenges that we're likely to face over the coming decades throughout the course of our careers. So I think that's kind of one key perspective that we are seeing through the development of Leaders 2050, is in terms of what we can get out of it as individuals. I think as organizations, there are several key benefits that they can get and businesses can get from developing networks like Leaders 2050. So the first is around building relationships across the sector. This is an opportunity for young leaders to develop those relationships, and also an opportunity for our more senior leaders to talk about something that is exciting that they're doing, that our young leaders are doing, that are bringing value. I guess, secondly, there's something really exciting here around talent attraction and retention, so it's becoming increasingly important for businesses to focus on ensuring that the voices of the young leaders are heard, and also recognizing that as young leaders, we're increasingly making choices around the organizations that we want to work for that, I guess, reflect our ambitions around contributing and having a purpose related to delivering the climate and the energy transition agenda. So there's something really there that organizations can benefit from around talent attraction and retention. And there's also something really important around how we're being perceived to tackle the challenges that we're facing around delivering net zero and the energy transition. So I guess externally, networks like this give a really key opportunity to shout about all the exciting things that we're doing as organizations. So I think there's, all in there, there's a lot of things that are really exciting, both for individuals that can help in developing our own careers, but also for businesses developing things like Leaders 2050, these types of collaborations which can deliver lots of really tangible benefits going forwards as well.
Thanks, Adam. Avery, I believe you're the best person to answer this question. So you have heard from all our colleagues over the last 2 days, right? As a platform, how do we actually create value for the younger generation?
That's a hard question, Ankit. And I'm going to move away from the speaker again because I don't want that horrible noise. How do we create value for the next generation? I mean, Mike and I chatted about it a little bit, but setting the agenda to be exponentially more ambitious than it currently is, but with those tangible kind of practical actions that we can be taking both as leaders kind of today, but also tomorrow, I think is a way that we kind of both within Leaders 2050 and kind of with our clients and with our partners in this network or whether it's other networks, can be setting that agenda and really adding value to, the generation that comes after us as well. I think we talk about ourselves as if we're next gen and we're here, we're working, we are the generation, but we should also be thinking about what those kind of emerging topics are, after us and what does that look like from, Mike talked about legacy from the senior leaders perspective. I think we have to take responsibility that we have one too.
Thank you so much. We have heard from the KPMG Leaders 2050 chairs and co-chairs. I'm interested to know what are the expectations of our colleagues from industries, from, we even have members from government over here, policymakers over here. What are your expectations? And what do you think a platform like this can do to enhance the overall engagement for youth in climate policy making? Asta, you want to have a go? I'm sorry, I said I'll be picking on people.
Okay. Well, no, I think from my perspective, I see inclusivity as an important aspect of energy transitions, definitely, especially when I talk about gender equality. Even with the IEF been engaged with their equality initiative. So I think platforms like Leaders 2050 can encourage, through networking sessions or, through collaborations, how to improve gender participation in the whole debate. So, I mean, just for example, we have these big panel discussions across all the events and conferences, and we struggle to have female sitting on the dais, we struggle to get one female panelist on the dais. So I think, these platforms, I don't know how, but maybe encourage more participation of women. Thanks.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm moving away from the speaker again. I think that's an incredible point, and Mike is laughing that I had to throw my hand up because a lot of the work that I've done, both within KPMG and prior to that, has been at the intersection of gender and climate, and one that I'm really passionate about. Leaders 2050 last year published a report in the UK called Diversity for Net Zero, and it really looked at how bringing diverse perspectives, both across, regionally, ethnically, and gender-wise, really adds to and accelerates our work on climate action. And this is a statistic that is widely kind of repeated both in the COP spaces. We know that more countries, or countries that have more female representation in ministerial positions, are ratifying land treaties at much faster rates than countries that have less diversity. We know that boards that have, corporate boards that have more female representation are also setting, more ambitious ESG commitments and reaching emissions reduction targets faster than boards that are not. And we also see this in the entrepreneurship space, where we have a lot of amazing women innovating for kind of socially just solutions and really innovating in the energy and climate spaces in an intersectional way. So I just wanted to validate that approach, and it really resonates with me both as a young woman, but also as someone who's deeply passionate about this intersection, that it's one that we need to absolutely define when we're talking about a just transition, and define quite clearly. But also when we talk about diversity, it means so much more than gender. It means Indigenous peoples, it means marginalized groups, as Charlotte mentioned. So I think there's an opportunity to really define what we mean by justice. I know we kind of briefly talked about reparations in a kind of different context before, but I think there's a real opportunity to define what we mean and then set really tangible goals to achieve that, leveraging the fact that the diversity is an accelerator to net zero and has been proven to do so.
Thanks, Avery. I'm just being conscious of time. We have a session after this. What I like to do is, we have senior leaders in the room, right? And over the course of last 1 hour, let's say, we have heard a lot of young voices. I'm just curious to get reflections and thoughts, reactions of the senior leaders in our room right now. Anvesha. All right, so Anvesha will come in the end. I'll go to Sharad.
I'm Sharad from KPMG Singapore. It's very encouraging discussion. Can you hear me? Yeah. Extremely good thoughts. I thought very wide coverage. A couple of points come to my mind. First is creating a network like this is very, very important in the current world, because probably most of the climate talks are failing because we have become too nationalistic. We don't understand each other's problems, and of course we don't trust each other, right? And this kind of young networks, and that's what the question was, right? How can young people participate? I think if you can step up and understand each other's problems and start trusting each other, that will be a very powerful solution for climate change. Because I do believe in human ingenuity to solve the climate challenge. I always try to compare climate crisis with the pandemic that we went through. And if you look at it, the way the world came together to solve the pandemic was an amazing example of innovation, technology, and financing, right? I don't think we are dearth of financing, right? According to some statistics, the world spent $11 trillion to get rid of COVID in various ways, including vaccine, right? So I don't think financing is ever a problem. Technology innovation has happened. I think somebody mentioned we probably have most of the technologies in place. I think it's a question of connecting the dots and making it much more commercially attractive. That's very important. And I think the third important point is partnerships. It's very, very critical that it's not a public sector problem or a private sector problem. I think we all have to work together to make it happen. And in that regard, I think the more trust we can have, the more we understand each other's problem. We can get rid of the global north and global south debate that's happening, and perhaps come up with a good climate agenda which all of us can sign up to. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Sharad, for your thoughts. Yeah, James.
Thank you. I'd just like to say be in the room and contribute is probably the biggest impact you can have. So I was chatting to Georgie Jarvis earlier around the potential for people from the Leaders 2050 network to sit on all the major client services teams within KPMG, because I suspect they can come back together and give a general perspective to global lead partners like Claire and others, what they're seeing across, what sort of themes they're seeing across a whole host of accounts, and be able to offer some sort of new insight. So yeah, finding more ways to be in the room like you have today and contributing to the discussion, I think is fundamental. And I suspect there's a bunch of senior leaders in here who would support your participation in things like CSTs and other forums within KPMG as well.
Sure. Simon has a point.
Yeah, Simon Verley, Head of Energy in the UK firm at KPMG. First thing I want to say is just how hugely proud I am of Leaders 2050 and the group of young people that sort of started this and have kept it snowballing going forward. And we need you more than ever right now, because the world is an incredibly fractured and dysfunctional place right now. As you just turn on the news, you can see in front of us, unfortunately. So to pick up Sharad's theme, we're going to need new forms of collaboration. Public sector, private sector, different organizations. There's no one organization that's going to have all the answers on climate change. So if you can produce a new form of collaboration between organizations to come up with solutions, that's what we're going to need in the future, because currently we're not doing that as leaders, and I hold my hand up as one of them, but we're not doing that. So we need you to keep the pressure up for those new forms of collaboration that ultimately will help us solve this problem.
Sure, sure. I think in the interest of time, I'll request Anvesha to please share your thoughts and just give a vote of thanks from KPMG's behalf.
Yeah, no, thanks Ankit. And just to quickly introduce myself, I'm Anvesha Thakkar, partner KPMG India. I also am the national lead for renewables for KPMG, and work very closely with incredible people like Mike, who's my mentor and friend as well, with the Global Decarbonization Hub, where I co-lead the energy transition space. So I must say, I echo what Simon said. I'm so incredibly proud of this group and extremely proud to be the steer for the Indian chapter of the Leaders 2050 program. I'm so happy that 22 youth leaders from 14 countries could make it today to share views from around the world. And if I reflect on the two key things that came out, and there were a lot of great points, and I think we had a very comprehensive discussion. But the two key things that struck me is everything that we said, there was underlying it two key principles, the principles of inclusivity and innovation. Why am I saying inclusivity? We heard the points about, just transition. I'm stunned that this group of youth are already kind of talking about just transition when it probably doesn't affect them. They're talking about affordability, security, when probably that doesn't affect them as well. They're talking about the next generation. I don't think at that age I even thought about it for a second. And they're talking about the next generation and the legacy that they leave behind. So the inclusivity in the approach is absolutely fabulous. And that also reflects in the thinking. On the technologies front, because nuclear was talked about, energy efficiency was talked about, direct air capture was talked about. So clearly in their minds, they are already thinking of every possible solution that can be out there to really create the difference. And that is the inclusive thinking that we need, because we need all hands on the deck and we need the energy of the people in this room. Innovation, because we talked about the fact that the technologies that we need today are probably not all there. I mean, technologies that we need tomorrow are not there today, but there's so much of innovation happening. COVID was an example of how, the human will, collaboration, actually came through to take us through a situation which we thought was absolutely something that was insurmountable. But we came out to the other end, we came out smiling and our masks are off. I never thought that I would live to see the day when my mask will be off. So thank you to the world for that. So the human mind, the power of the human mind is something that we just cannot ignore. And that is what is going to lead us through. So I end this, absolutely fabulous session with a great sense of optimism for the youth that are out there who are going to be the center of all the innovation that's going to come through. What is needed is to give them the voice, the platform, to include them in the decision making, and most of all, have them believe in themselves. Because if they believe in themselves, we are going to see fabulous results. Thank you everyone for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Anvesha. Thank you so much, everyone. We have a 10 minutes break. We are serving coffee and snacks outside, and we reconvene after that. Thank you so much.